Hello and welcome everyone. This evening, my name is Pumla Gobodo Madigizela, Sachi Chair for Violent Histories and Transgenerational Trauma, and the Chair of the Center for the Study of the Afterlife of Violence and the Reparative Quest, AVReQ for short, here at Stellenbosch University. Our center brings together students, postdoctoral fellows, scholars and practitioners to engage in interdisciplinary exploration, research, and dialogue to explore various avenues of inquiry, of conversations and debates to come up with insights concerning some of the most complicated aspects of our social life, social and political life. Here at Stellenbosch University, we pride ourselves for opening up the space for dialogue constantly, and this particular space where we are tonight, the Museum of Stellenbosch University, has earned a reputation as such a site for these conversations. Tonight, we bring you the fourth installment of the Stellenbosch University Annual Africa Day Lecture, with the theme Toward a Connected Africa. This annual series to celebrate our continent is hosted by the Rector and Vice Chancellor, Professor Wim de Villiers and Mrs. Catherine de Villiers, who is always present at these events, but tonight she sent her apologies, she couldn't join us. Our colleagues at the Center for Collaboration in Africa have partnered with us and partner with us in general in organizing these events. And my colleague, dear colleague and friend here, Dr. Nico Enima, as the director of the center, has partnered with us throughout the events that we have organized in this, for this event. This year, we have been joined by another great friend and colleague, Bongane Mgijima, who's the director of the museum, of this museum. So thank you, Bongane, for opening the space for us. For now, though, I'd like to welcome all of you tonight for braving this cold evening to join us, you as the audience present this evening, and the audience out there in at home, in your various places at home. We welcome you and thank you for joining us. We would like to welcome especially our guest, our honored guest, the Acting Consulate General of the United States, Ms. Emily Schaeffer, and the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, Ms. Tanya Verheid. Thank you very much for joining us, both of you. Our most special guest tonight is Dr. Chidi Achebe, who I will introduce at a later stage. For now, I'd like to introduce the speakers who will follow me. First, Dr. Nico Enima, who will come up and welcome you and give a short speech. He will be followed by our Vice Chancellor and Rector, Professor Wim de Villiers. I told them that I'm not going to introduce them, except mention them. And they very happily accepted that. So thank you very much. I'm not going to waste too much time. We've got a very tight schedule. At the end of Dr. Achebe's speech, my partner in the center, Dr. Samantha van Skalkbeek, will give and the Deputy Director of the center will give the closing address. So that is, at the same time, I'm giving you the running sheets for tonight. So without much ado, I invite you to join us. Thank you.
Prof. Pumla mentioned it's a cold evening, but I must admit the atmosphere is wonderful. We had wonderful music, and it's wonderful to be here in person. It's been a while. I think We're so used to online meetings and presenting this online, so it's wonderful also to have to be here in person. So depending on where you are, good evening, good afternoon, and also good morning. We're streaming it live today. And as introduced, my name is Nico Elema, and I'm the Director of the Center for Collaboration in Africa here at Stellenbosch University. I would like to thank our Rector and Vice-Chancellor for hosting this annual event, and also the other dignitaries mentioned earlier. I would not go into much detail. I would also like to thank Prof. Phumla Gobodo-Madikizela for inviting me to give these opening remarks. And I must admit I got carried away a little bit. She said 5 minutes, but I might not be able to stick to that. So as we continue to celebrate Africa Day under the theme Towards a Connected Africa, this theme also provides a broad framework for our keynote speaker, Dr. Achebe, who will share his insights and on intellectual being nation builders, which we will hear a little bit later. For me, this theme highlights the important role of purposeful partnerships and which that play in unlocking the contribution of Africa and the contribution Africa can make through capacity development and research. And I would like to spend a few moments on 3 aspects which I deem relevant to achieve such purposeful partnerships. Let me start off with the first aspect, the diversity of the African continent. There's a very well-known slide which I often use, which illustrates that one can, with ease, fit in the entire United States of America within the 3/4 of West Africa, leaving room for the entire China and Japan to fit snugly into the Central and Southern Africa. Let us not forget that the United Kingdom, which is about the same size as Madagascar, a relatively small island on the east coast of Africa. The rest of North and Eastern Africa can be covered by Spain, France, Italy, and Eastern Europe and India. From personal experience, after having traveled to about 33 other African countries, I can testify that the continent is vast, with enormous differences. To start off with, you only need to ask a Nigerian and a Ghanaian whose jollof rice is the best, and you might get caught up in an argument which lasts for quite a while. This, considering that they are virtual neighbors within the same region. The difference, however, go beyond jollof rice. And our diversity stems from our history, our culture, our religion, our language, and our traditions. Considering such diversity, we should not for one moment even be presumptuous enough to think that we should simply apply solutions that we developed in our context to the rest of the continent. Where possible, we need to spend time in each other's spaces and peel away layers in order to understand each other's background, each other's context, each other's fears and hopes and aspirations. Let us understand each other's ideas and how you would want to change the world, and we might just learn something from it. To then, as a university on the continent, be able to tap into each other's hopes and dreams, we need commitments, which leads me to my second aspect, institutional commitment. In 2016, Stellenbosch University established the Center for Collaboration in Africa to specifically commit resources towards creating an enabling environment for the university community to create partnerships with other African institutions. The center builds on initiatives that started over 20 years ago, where Stellenbosch University has supported partnerships, for example, with Makerere University in Uganda, Umar Bongo University in Gabon, and the University of Ghana, to name but a few, as we now have 33 formal agreements with institutions across the continent. In addition, the center hosts the secretariats of thematic research networks in integrated water resource management, disaster risk reduction with partner institutions across the continent, where we are able to tap in, where research are able to tap into these networks. We also host the SDG 2063 Impact Hub, collating information and advancing Stellenbosch University's activities that are aligned to the UN Sustainable Goals and also our African Union Agenda 2063 goals. More recently, we also facilitate our contributions within the African Union Development Agency Center for Collaboration in Science, Technology and Innovation. I recognize it's quite a long name, but it's a trilateral partnership between African Union Development Agency, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research and Stellenbosch University, where we aim to upscale homegrown innovations for the rest of the continent. And considering my previous remark of the size of the continent, to further nurture these bilateral partnerships, the Centre continued to manage the Africa Collaboration Grant, which have supported more than 320 mobility initiatives since 2010 to the value of 8.2 million rand. Mobility activities in hosting partners here at Stellenbosch, visiting partners across the continent, and undertaking workshops and attending conferences initiated by the broader Stellenbosch community. Important to note that these funds are not external funding, but a financial focus or initiative that comes from the central budget within the university. Stepping away from the centre for a moment, I was also encouraged by the feedback our Rector and Vice-Chancellor, Prof. de Villiers, gave to the Stellenbosch University Council in December 2021, where he presented 7 game changers for SU's future success. The 7 game changers include, amongst others, program renewal to continue to meet the requirements of the global economy, and the school and the faculty model, as evident by the establishment for the School for Data Science and Computational Thinking, and also the School for Climate Studies more recently. Of significance, however, and I got quite excited when I read this, the Vice-Chancellor also highlighted models to unlock partnerships in Africa and further afield as a game changer, which for obvious reasons speak directly into what we aim to achieve and provide a significant leverage for the work we do. The third and final aspect, before I get carried away too much, I would like to highlight the necessity of personal commitment towards partnership development with peers on the African continent. Partnerships often emanate from a spark between 2 individuals who share the same field of study with a passion for a subject from which collaboration can flourish. It is the Professor Phumla Gobodo-Madikizelas and the colleagues who have a passion for building better societies in South Africa and in Rwanda and Tanzania in better understanding historical trauma and transformation. It is the Dr. Graham Jacobs and colleagues, an award-winning virologist, building partnerships with colleagues in Cameroon and collaborating with other partners. The Prof. Tulio de Oliveras and colleagues, collaborating and building capacity across the continent to identify and fight new COVID-19 variants. So let me conclude. As individuals, we need to ensure that we open our minds towards partnership development with like-minded colleagues that also have a passion to understand each other's different contexts across the continent. And remember, Africa is not one country. Moreover, while we operate within this environment, we know that our environment has demonstrated an institutional commitment. I am so excited to see what the future holds. Thank you very much. As Prof. Phumla indicated, if I can invite the Rector and Vice-Chancellor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elmer, and welcome everyone to Stellenbosch University's annual Africa Day lecture. Thank you, Professor Phumla Gobodo-Madikizela, for your wonderful leadership also in this regard. To start off, I'd like to welcome our main speaker for the evening, Dr. Chidi Chike Achebe. Thank you so much for taking the time to engage with us. We very much look forward to that. I'd also like to welcome the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, Ms. Tanya Verat, for being here. Thank you for your support. Phumla, my briefing notes actually says that the Acting Consul General of the United States, Ms. Schaffer, can unfortunately not be here in person, but she's virtually here because she's tested positive for COVID recently, which seems to be something that's going around. So It's really a pleasure to welcome Dr. Achebe. He is a physician executive, so I can claim some kinship with him, and that I'm also a physician. I'm a gastroenterologist. But Dr. Achebe received an MPH, Master of Public Health, from the Harvard School of Public Health. His MD at Dartmouth Medical School and an MBA degree at Yale University School of Management. He's the CEO of African Integrated Development Enterprise, an organization dedicated to the development of the African continent, focusing on healthcare, education, agriculture, and telecommunications. Professor Gobora Madikizela will introduce him properly, but I want to say that he, as a son of Africa, is someone with a true vision for our continent, and I really look forward to hearing him speak. So this annual event was launched as part of Stellenbosch University marking its centenary in 2018. So this is number 4. And it has since become an established and important date in our calendar. So the aim of this is that we want to bring distinguished scholars, scientists, writers, artists, public intellectuals, and practitioners from a range of disciplines to Stellenbosch University to lead public conversations that can expand our understanding the role of the university, Because universities are not exclusively for acquiring academic knowledge. They are complex organizations. They are institutions for the ages. They are organizations with intricate social and political structures where students learn important life skills. And in the past few weeks, Stellenbosch University specifically reminded us of the social dynamics at play at institutions of higher learning. The incidents of apparent and what some has termed spectacular racism and alleged rape on campus are exceedingly troublesome. And in my personal capacity and as part of the management team, we condemn all forms of crime and any infringement on human rights, including racism and gender-based violence, because human dignity, after all, is non-negotiable at our university and must be respected and upheld. So after the incidents were reported, we acted swiftly, and investigations are underway, but these incidents proved that much work needs to be done. We've offered support to those affected, and in a highly unusual move, and considering the impact that these events have had on our students' mental and emotional state, we decided to postpone the first semester examination period by 1 week. And although we believe that this was necessary, and it is necessary, a gesture like this won't solve our very real problems. We have to grapple with the realities of what transpired on campus. But I believe events like this annual Africa Day lecture is part of the solution. We look to leaders like Dr. Achebe to shed light on how we can reflect on, but also move on from incidents that inflict trauma. And the topic of Dr. Achebe's lecture, Intellectuals as Nation Builders, has a hopeful tone. And I believe it's crucial to remain optimistic about the future. In his great book, Our Long Walk to Economic Freedom, one of Stellenbosch University's economics professors, the economic historian Johan Fourie, quotes a fellow economic historian, David Landis, who at the end of his magnum opus, The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, at the end, that was written at the end of the 20th century, the late 1990s, he wrote, and I quote, "In this world, the optimists have it, not because they're always right, but because they are positive. Even when wrong, they are positive. And that is the way of achievement, correction, improvement, and success. Educated, eyes-open optimism pays. Pessimism can only offer the empty consolation of being right. What a wonderful quote. So, by hosting the annual Africa Day lecture, Stellenbosch University creates the opportunity for us to highlight the importance of leading conversations and intellectual debates, and these conversations have a potency that can and should extend beyond academia. And I know that's one of Dr. Achebe's main messages, namely the need for scholars to take leadership in society and create change on our continent. With regard to Africa Day celebrations, in addition to today's lecture, Tygerberg International at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences also hosted an event about the 25th of May, 2022, during which Dr. John Mark Bwawanika, a global e-health scholar, shared his experiences in clinical research in infectious diseases, entrepreneurship, and e-health with the topic Technology and Innovations Advancing Health in Africa. So these are important conversations, very important conversations, and they help keep Africa moving forward. So again, I want to extend a special word of thanks to Professor Phumla Gobode-Madikizela, who holds our research chair in Studies in Historical Trauma and Transformation. You play such a key role in this initiative, and you do such great work as chair. Thank you very much for that, and thanks to the audience for joining us, and enjoy the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to you both, Professor de Villiers and Dr. Elima, for the wonderful opening address, the speeches that you have given us. It's such a, I mean, the idea of educated optimism is so powerful. And in fact, I think it's a great way of introducing Dr. Chidi Achebe. You've said a bit already, Professor de Villiers, about him, so I'll say the things that you did not say. I first encountered Dr. Achebe at a time when our country was grieving. Archbishop Desmond Tutu had just passed away, and there were many people who were being interviewed all over the world about their feelings, their encounters with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And one of those interviews was with Dr. Achebe. I was intrigued, I was spellbound by the interview that he gave. There was something about it that, I mean, listening to this young person speaking about Archbishop Desmond Tutu, drawing from the memory of his own father, Chinua Achebe, Professor Chinua Achebe, was so deeply inspiring for me. I was glued. I played on, I think, about 3 times the interview with him. There was something so nuanced, so wonderfully nuanced about the way that he was speaking, not just about Archbishop Tutu, but about his generation and the leadership of that era, what they mean for South Africa, what they mean for the continent. It was so beautiful. I sought him out. I sent email messages. I got the help of Unison to see if you can get him through social media. Eventually, we found him. And recently, I visited his home, and his home was so welcoming with his children. It was really, I mean, all the stuff you read about in his father's books. It was almost as if he's living the memory of his father. He's living the teachings and the memory of his father. It was just a wonderful human being, son of the soil, as we say, you know, in our language. So it was wonderful. So welcome, Chidi, over there, where you are. What I will add is that you would have been here. You very enthusiastically embraced this idea of coming to Stellenbosch, except you had to receive an award. Only last Friday, on the 27th, you were being awarded at Bard College for the wonderful work that you are doing. The award at Bard College is called the John and Samuel Bard Award in Medicine and Science, and it is awarded at the Bard College commencement ceremony, and this time it was on Friday when he was awarded this prize. And it is a prize that was given to him for his unique implementation of quote-unquote medicine without borders. That's one of the things that really impressed me when I started reading about him. He was at once a business person, an entrepreneur, and a doctor, a medical doctor, all of these things woven into one. And the business was across Africa. It was really in terms of bringing out the best from the African continent, from where he sits in Boston. So Chidi, I don't want to say much. People are going to experience you tonight. You are going to be not only fed and really filled with enthusiasm from this speech of yours, intellectuals as nation builders, but we are going to be inspired. So I look forward, and we look forward to what you are going to share with us tonight, and we invite you to come to the virtual podium. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Wow, that was fantastic introduction. Thank you, Professor Phumla Gobodo-Madikizela. I am absolutely thrilled to be giving this fourth Africa Day lecture at Stellenbosch University. I would like to recognize the Vice Chancellor, Professor Wim Villiers. I actually also send wonderful felicitations from your colleague, Patrick Okolo. He said he worked with you here when you were in the States. I'd like to also recognize the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Social Impact and Transformation, Professor Nico Kuopman, our honored guest, the Acting Consulate General of the United States. So my Acting Consulate General, Ms. Emily Schaefer, and the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, Ms. Taya Vierheit. My talk today is called Intellectuals as Nation Builders. I have dedicated it to my late father, Chidi Achebe, who has made so much possible for me. And it begins. In the 1960s, Jean-Paul Sartre, the literary giant and France's leading intellectual at the time, made a series of controversial statements during a public lecture. Incensed by his outburst, a group of French conservatives turned to Charles de Gaulle, the French general and president of the Fifth Republic, to caution the man of letters. After listening to their complaints, de Gaulle responded this way: "I caution Sartre, but Sartre is France." For de Gaulle, Sartre exemplified the highest ideals and aspirations of France, a scholar par excellence, an intellectual beacon for the world, exercising the fruits of democracy while actively engaged in shaping the destiny of post-World War II France. The West and other advanced nations did not arrive at this appreciation of intellectuals and intellectual discourse overnight. For centuries, diverse philosophers from around the world grappled with the question of the role of knowledge in society. Al-Kindi, Avicenna, Mullah Sadra, and several other Islamic scholars in the Middle East, as well as Western philosophers such as Socrates, Aristotle, Descartes, right through T.S. Kuhn to the postmodernists, through Friedrich Nietzsche, Immanuel Kant, Hannah Arendt, Albert Schweitzer, Johann von Goethe in German, or Goethe in English, all tackled this problem. Aristotle believed that thinkers should try to overcome ignorance and pursue knowledge for its own sake and not merely for its practical utility. But today we've come to some sort of comfortable medium that exists between the role of knowledge gathered for the improvement of society and knowledge, pursued and accumulated in its purest form, as Aristotle would want us to. Nowhere on earth is this example of intellectual balance at once more vibrant and probably under severe attack than in my home, the United States of America. The founders of the American experiment, Hamilton, Jefferson, Washington, Adams, Jay, Henry, Franklin, you get the gist, were some of the most educated men of their time. Now, they had flaws, but we'll leave that for now. Armed with an enviable intellectual dexterity, these men fashioned what has become one of the most admired and effective documents in history, the American Constitution. This intellectual record is the foundation of America's much celebrated democracy, an idea borrowed from the ancient Athenians, defined by Lincoln during his mythical Gettysburg Address as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and emulated around the world. America's prosperity and global dominance today is not accidental. It was meticulously charted by its constitution, guided by a succession of excellent leaders for the most part. Not all of them were excellent. Imbued with world-class education and intellect, and protected by its democracy. Perhaps the greatest of America's early intellectual presidents was the third president, Thomas Jefferson. He was not perfect either, but he believed very strongly that America's success could be achieved only through a high-quality educational system for its citizens. Such a system would also depend on teachers with the training, authority, and freedom to challenge their students and change their lives, as well as lay the foundations of intellectual meritocracy. Jefferson held that ignorance and sound self-government could not exist together. The one destroyed the other. A despotic government could restrain its citizens and deprive the people of their liberties only while they were ignorant. Only popular government can safeguard democracy. Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers or the people alone. The people themselves are its only safe depositories, and to render them safe, their minds must be improved to a certain degree. Now, this ancient dedication to educational quality and intellectual foresight has produced America's much envied higher educational system. Its 8 Ivy League universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, UPenn, Columbia, Brown, and Cornell, as well as equally excellent non-Ivy League institutions like MIT, Caltech, Stanford, Chicago, Northwestern, Duke, Johns Hopkins, Michigan, Berkeley, Virginia, Georgetown, UCLA, you get the gist, have become the global benchmark for educational excellence. Their combined endowment fund of over $300 billion, that's larger than Algeria's gross national product, promises to keep them in this influential position for a long time to come. Harvard, with its $52 billion endowment, and Yale, $42 billion, are easily wealthier than several countries across the globe. It is little wonder, therefore, that these institutions, Ivy League in particular, became the honing ground for America's leaders for centuries. Almost every single Supreme Court justice, almost, not all, attended one of these aforementioned institutions. 8 American presidents, John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams, Rutherford Hayes, Theodore Roosevelt and his cousin Franklin Delano Roosevelt, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama all studied at Harvard. Yale is a proud intellectual molder for at least 4 US presidents, the 2 Bushes, William Taft, William Jefferson Clinton, and our former Secretary of State, his wife Hillary Clinton. The West, let me be clear, does not hold a monopoly on economic success buoyed by intellectual ingenuity. One of the most stunning examples of radical transformation engendered by world-class intellectual leadership can be found in the well-known and admired Singapore miracle, which, by the way, was no miracle at all. In 1957, Singapore was a basket case and ranked lower in terms of poverty indices than a number of its African nations. Lee Kuan Yew, the Singaporean intellectual giant, statesman, and lawyer who served as Prime Minister of Singapore between 1959 and 1990, is widely recognized as the nation's founding father, and along with a series of intellectuals in his government, is credited with transforming his backwater, tiny, breakaway island state, few considered viable, racked with ethnic tension, political and economic problems, into one of the most prosperous, amazing first world nations on earth. China is currently poised to join Japan and other Asian economic giants like South Korea and the aforementioned Singapore in making the miraculous leap forward from underdevelopment to the club of advanced nations in record time. This is not surprising to economists, historians, or lay observers. For over 20 years, China's nominal GNP has grown at an annual rate of over 7%. By 2021, it had topped 15 trillion, second only to the United States. Indeed, by purchasing power parity, many economists already consider China's economy as the largest on the globe. China's success was made possible by uncompromising, concomitant effort to improve her educational system and to harness the collective intellectual potential of the world's most populous nation. Her recent entry into the so-called light frontier space with crewed missions is a statement to how far, is a testament to how far she has come. Now, Africa's central place in world history cannot be forgotten. Let us never forget that Africa is the cradle of world civilization and everything else emanated from Mother Africa. I once spoke to a group of Americans and I told them, everybody here is African, whether you like it or not. And they had to pause to think. We should teach our children everything about ancient Egypt, about some of the histories of greatest intellectuals, Tanhotep, Akhenaten from ancient Egypt, about Carthage, about the kingdom of Kush, the land of Punt, the kingdom of Aksum, about Mali, Songhai, Ghana, the empires of Ife, Oyo, Benin, Kanem Bornu, Nok, Nri in West Africa. We should be the griots to narrate the history of Great Zimbabwe, which, by the way, when the British discovered the fabulous walls around this great empire, thought they were built by aliens. We should sing songs of the kingdom of Mutapa and Butua, of the kingdoms of Maravi and the Zulu and Ndebele kingdoms, just to name a few. So what are some of the things holding us back if we've had this glorious past? Let's begin with ancient ideological and religious tensions. Across the continent, violence inspired by religious intolerance is increasing. This evil often travels as malignant, treacherous, and malicious quadruplets: ethnic, tribal, xenophobic hatreds, and misogyny. According to the Pew Research Center, more than a quarter of the world's countries experienced a high incidence of hostilities motivated by religious hatred, mob violence related to religion, terrorism, and harassment of women for violating religious codes. The recent burning to death of a Nigerian female university student in Sokoto State is a global call to action for the best of our intellectual leadership to restore civility and tolerance amongst all peoples and religions. In this era of turbulence and uncertainty, interfaith action may offer a solution to reverse this downward spiral. Unquestionably, if we are to develop, Africans must once and for all bury the hatchet on ideological and religious conflicts over religion, which are at once a distraction and an impediment to advancement. And let me be clear, I understand the importance of religion in our lives and would never belittle it. As a grandson of a catechist of the Christian Missionary Society and a teacher, by the way, I comprehend the seminal place of Christianity, and that unlike what people have bandied about, is not a foreign religion. Christianity arrived in Africa within 20 years of its reaching the Roman Empire in the 4th century. It is therefore a categorical fact that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, called Tewado in Ethiopia, is one of the oldest organized Christian bodies in the world. African saints are legion, as are our contributions from early patristic Christianity, Tertullian, Origen, and later Augustine of Hippo. You cannot be given what already belongs to you. We should not be acquiescent and condescended upon by some ignorant missionaries who purport to introduce us to Christianity. Instead, as wise and ancient peoples, we should teach the world tolerance, serve as humble disseminators of the truth of history and a gospel that we own, we feature in, and we played a part in. Although scholars, whether they're geneticists, historians, and anthropologists alike, still debate their true origins today, a few things are clear. The Akusumite kingdom adopted Judaism and the law of Moses during the reign of King Menelik, and then adopted Christianity later as a main faith in 341 AD. Since then, Ethiopia has been observing both the Old and New Testament practices. The pilgrimage that's been recorded by a eunuch of the treasurer to Jerusalem shortly after the death of Christ is but one hallowed historical example of Ethiopia's long and deep link to both the ancient Israelites in Jerusalem and Christianity. Indeed, albeit controversial, many Ethiopians believe that the Ark of the Covenant still exists and rests in Aksum. The other great religion, Islam, first arrived some 7 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 639 on the shores of Africa, under the command of the Muslim Arab general Amir ibn al-Asi, and then spread to large swath of North Africa, the Horn of Africa, Sahel region of West Africa, the Swahili coast, and much of the northern flanks of the great rivers of West Africa and Central Africa, with minority immigrant populations spreading later to Southern Africa. The Moors, we know, who are African, ruled Spain for 800 years and introduced an African Islamic civilization replete with advances in mathematics, astronomy, art, and agriculture, and helped propel Europe out of the Dark Ages into the Renaissance. They are responsible for introducing new scientific technologies to Europe and scientific progress in astronomy, chemistry, mathematics, geography, and philosophy as well. They introduced a slew of agricultural produce to Spain and influenced Spanish education, as well as introduced Aristotelian philosophy back into Spain after they left. Clearly, there is no question that Africans have occupied a central place in the world's major religions. The question, therefore, is how can we find a way to live together in peace, love, and respect? Which brings us to the question, how on earth did we lose our way? How does a continent once symbolized by Emperor Mansa Musa of Mali, purportedly the richest man in history, who distributed so much gold during the Hajj to Mecca that he devoured the price of gold for a generation in the Middle East, now become the embodiment of poverty, disease, chaos, and corruption? How have the external forces and the legacies of slavery, colonialism helped in creating our current state of affairs? There isn't enough time to fully delve into these broad topics. However, I hope that we can all agree that our condition today is due to a complex conglomeration of the aforementioned factors, but further compounded by the consequences of homegrown scourges. One, a past of successive military coups. Two, endemic corruption. Three, inept leadership and persistent cults of mediocrity running the affairs of the continent. How much of these present-day challenges are self-inflicted versus the fact that we continue to allow ourselves to be pawns on the grand geopolitical chessboard? J.D., writing in The Cold War in Independent Africa, summarizes our dilemma beautifully. The effects of the Cold War in Africa were stifling. In many respects, it was a second scramble for Africa. The great powers, in this case, the Soviet Union and the US, wanted Africa simply to prevent each other from possessing it. African economic and political development was hindered. Independence was often delayed. Neither the Soviet goal of socialist development nor the American goal of democratic nationhood were realized from the vast opportunities present in independent Africa. My late father, Professor Chidi Achebe, in the seminal treatise, The Trouble with Nigeria, Please Replace Nigeria with Africa, summarizes our plight this way. The trouble with Nigeria is simply a failure of leadership. The Nigerian problem is the unwillingness or an inability of its leaders to rise to the responsibility, to the challenge of personal example, which are the hallmarks of true leadership. In agreeing with that diagnosis, I will add that some of the most brilliant leaders of the post-colonial era, Lumumba, Nkrumah, Sankara, for example, were deposed by superpower intelligence agencies or interpolations of former imperial powers because these leaders were perceived as on the wrong side of the Cold War geopolitical conflict. The new African intellectual leader that we're calling to arise must be a servant leader and a sophisticate, one that understands the complexity of global politics and is able to walk the fine line between an advocacy for African liberation and development and a non-aligned vision of friendship with all nations. So we begin to discuss the African intellectual conundrum by first visiting The Greatest Generation, a book that Tom Brokaw wrote, where he salutes Americans whose sacrifices and work changed the course of American history and put the US in the path of post-World War II economic expansion and prosperity. We have already shown that Africa has produced similar individuals. Why then, with all this brain power, does Africa find itself in what we would call the intellectual wasteland? To understand how we lost our way, it's important to revisit our history once again. The dawn of independence in Africa saw the emergence of leaders in a myriad of fields, such as politics, the arts, law, science, and medicine, economics, and commerce. These giants of men and women from diverse backgrounds were intellectuals and were on a mission to redirect their young nations onto a path of development after years of colonialism. In the interest of progressive thinking, I define an intellectual as a thinker or visionary with or without a university education. Together, this group brought more recognition and honor to their respective nations than any other set before or since, at least so far. What follows is certainly not an exhaustive list, but a sample of achievers, the so-called best and brightest. Figures like Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Kwame Nkrumah of the Gold Coast, now Ghana, Julius Nyerere, Tanganyika, now Tanzania, Leopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal, Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria, Felix Houphouët-Boigny of Côte d'Ivoire, Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, David Webster, Helen Suzman, Steve Biko, Solomon Malangu, Helen Joseph, Lillian Masadiba, Ngozi Fumzila, Lamblo Nguka, and Charlotte Maxeka are just a few giants that come to mind that led the struggles for African liberation and nationalism and must be celebrated. In the arts, we have Nigeria's Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, J.P. Clark, Cyprian Akwensi, Christopher Okibo, Chukwuemeka Ike, Flora Nwapa, Kenya's Ngugi wa Thiong'o, South Africa's Nadine Gordimer, and J.M. Kotsi, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, Aikwe Arma, Ama Ataido, Senegal's Leopold Sédar Senghor, Sheikh Anta Diop, Suleiman Diange, Algeria's Albert Camus, Jacques Derrida, and Frantz Fanon, Uganda's Mahmoud Mamdani, Cameroon's Akil Mbembe, Tanzania's Julius Nyerere again, and on and on. These are examples of intellectuals that stand out from that era. For the young people, we need to salute a new generation of African writers, in particular Benek Okri, Teju Cole, Chimamanda Adichie, Ahmed Alidi, No Violet Bulawayo, Amita Forna, Isi Osandu, B. Bandele, Uwan Akwan, Dinwa Mengetsu, Tomi Adeyemi, Chika Unigwe, and on and on. These young people are blazing new trails and hauling in laurels. But there's the failure of the African educated classes, despite this admirable and enviable list. Africa is still in this perilous state, akin to the fable of the long spoons. I hope most of you know this, where if we tap into our treasure of intellect, cooperate and do things right, our continent could be paradise. Conversely, if we fail to see the wisdom in this strategy, we are doomed to hell. Intellectuals are not without their own issues. It is important to point out that some members of Africa's educated classes bear their own brunt of pathologies. The historical eagerness of some educated Africans to serve under corrupt regimes and accept secondary roles under mediocre leaders must be one of the most tragic predicaments of post-independent Africa. Some believe that this sad situation has been made possible by a systematic, intentional impoverishment of the educated classes, particularly those that lecture in African universities, under a series of military regimes, creating a group, albeit small, of pseudo-intellectuals, greedy, petty, scramblers for materialistic accumulation and illicit power. In The Wretched of the Earth, about intellectuals of this ilk, Fanon eloquently posits the unpreparedness of the educated classes, the lack of practical links between them and the mass of the people, their laziness, and let it be said, their cowardice at the decisive moment of the struggle will give rise to tragic mishaps. In Africa today, we're living witnesses to that tragedy. It is important to stress that Africa has not developed a culture of celebrating honest, hardworking achievers. Instead, we've allowed others to foist upon us a paradoxical, anti-intellectual situation in which recognition, indeed the highest national honors sometimes, are heaped on former military dictators for, pray tell me, for shooting themselves into power and looting the national treasury, and their corrupt civilian cohorts who serve these kleptocracies with glee over our true heroes. If this was a chapter from Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Autumn of the Patriarch, then we could take solace in this fictional nature of this pathetic comical madness. The fact that this is our reality should make us all pause in horror, ponder deeply, and take action. Some may attempt to counter my overall argument by raising the fact that a number of intellectuals have actually served in positions of power and leadership. The former presidents, for instance, of Botswana and Namibia come to mind. They did extremely well for their countries. I will concede to those exceptions. My rebuttal remains unassailable. Far too often across this continent, even when members of this intellectual class have been involved in government, they have far too frequently been given roles under less capable individuals or served for too short a period of time to make the desired impact. Therefore, it has led to an oppressive power of the cult of mediocrity. Many pundits will agree that the blame for Africa's dilemma lies squarely at the feet of incompetent leadership and mediocrity she has endured over the past 4 decades. A nightmare of unending stream of mediocre leaders has turned this once burgeoning continent into a cesspool of corruption and ineptitude. Easy access to petrodollars, diamonds, gold, copper, uranium, bauxite, doesn't matter, has helped fan skyrocketing corruption, particularly in the public sector. A culture of kickbacks, government-sanctioned bunkering of oil and other commodities, and the emergence of a corrupt and politically inept leadership has turned several countries in Africa into a kleptomaniac's paradise. Most Africans will accept that a meritocracy within a democracy will be best for the continent. A true meritocracy transcends ethnicity, class, creed, and gender. It is the only system that will ensure that the best and brightest run the affairs of our continent, a development that will benefit most of the population. Can we not put in place a system that constantly seeks excellence, a process that matches appropriate position with the most qualified applicant? And finally, a culture that asks questions such as, is this person the best person for the job? Many Africans look upon their leaders, who often rig themselves into power, and their cronies with distrust, even disdain. So why haven't we seen sustained, peaceful, organized protest? Is it possible that many Africans have come to accept the present chaotic, corrupt system they find themselves in? Is it also possible that some strive, often even fight, to sustain this present state of affairs in the delusional hope that in this dysfunctional system, somehow they too will have a greater chance of achieving illicit success, emerging as big men and women, than in a democracy that celebrates meritocracy? Are we blind to a great seer's crystal clear perception that corruption in Africa has passed the alarming and has entered the fatal stage? And Africa will die if we continue to pretend that she's only slightly indisposed. The ancient Israelites provide profound cautionary wisdom for all Africans with these words: it is ill with a people when vicious men are advanced and men of worth and men and women of worth are kept under hatches. Let me briefly just talk about other major challenges facing Africa. I touched on the geopolitics and the rise of China. So let me revisit that briefly. For the past decade, the West appeared to be standing motionless as they watched China invest over $101 billion in Africa. Two major scholars provide a deep analysis of the pros and cons of Chinese foreign direct investment in Africa. The reason why China is investing in Africa is mainly the access to natural resources, in particular oil and minerals. China is also the world's largest consumer of steel, copper, coal, and platinum, and would like to access African markets. I'm not going to tackle controversial topics such as the debt trap, second colonialism, extractive nature of Chinese investments in this lecture. The question is, where is the rest of the world? Well, the G7 finally announced their intention to invest $80 billion in Africa's private sector. The EU, led by Germany and France, has gone one step further and announced $150 billion investment plan for Africa. That's commendable. Concerning Africa, my home country, the USA, still appears to be playing catch-up. Jordan Link, writing in the American Progress, provides that it is critical that the United States works to rebalance its relations with African countries, especially as the continent undergoes dramatic demographic and economic changes. Africa's population is expected to double to 2.5 billion by 2050, accounting for more than a quarter of the global population. In addition, prior to COVID-19 pandemic, the continent was home to 7 of the world's fastest growing economies. As African expert John Devermont argues, every global problem is going to have an African dimension to it. If Africa had true intellectuals in leadership, we will be able to I have to drink some more water. That's better. If Africa had true intellectuals in leadership, we will be able to more effectively showcase to the world that the continent is home to 7 of the fastest growing economies. Nigeria's GDP is the largest on the continent and the 25th in size in the globe. And it just surpassed 1 trillion in purchase power parity. Mind you, Nigeria is grossly underperforming. Just imagine the possibilities when its full potential is unleashed. Kenya, the 3rd largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa, is now one of the most dynamic and rapidly expanding on earth. Africa should be seen as a prime environment for profitable investments, not a charity case. The right kind of intellectual leader can effectively recast our image and position us for a sustainable economic boom. Climate change. In the last 50 to 100 years, the temperatures over Africa have increased by almost 1 degree Celsius. We cannot ignore the catastrophe that is coming and must take radical interventions to reverse this course. Africa is particularly vulnerable to extreme weather events, extreme droughts, famine, or cataclysmic floods, similar to those that Southern Africa has recently witnessed. Climate change must be tackled aggressively, and strategies to cut off the hydra-headed monster should endlessly torment the imaginations of our leaders. So what is the way forward? Another drink? First, let's understand ourselves and our history. The person for whom this lecture is dedicated, Chidi Achebe, saw the need for an intellectual process that will lead to the empowering of peoples who had been knocked silent by the trauma of all kinds of dispossession. He captures this sentiment succinctly in the following excerpt. I would be quite satisfied if my novels, especially the ones set in the past, did no more than teach my readers that their past, with all its imperfections, was not one long night of savagery from which the first Europeans, acting on God's behalf, delivered them. This theme, put quite simply, is that African peoples did not hear of culture for the first time from the West, that their societies were not mindless, but frequently had philosophy, of great depth and value and beauty, that they had poetry, and above all, they had dignity. It is this dignity that many African peoples all but lost in the colonial period, and it's this dignity that they must now regain. The worst thing that can happen to any people is the loss of their dignity and self-respect. The writer or intellectual's duty is to help them regain it by showing them in human terms what happened to them and what they lost. There's a saying in Igbo that a man who can tell where the rain began to beat him cannot know where he dried his body. The intellectual can tell the people where the rain began to beat them. After all, the intellectual's duty is not to beat this morning's headlining topicality, is to explore in depth the human condition. In Africa, that intellectual cannot perform their task unless he or she has a proper sense of history. We need to develop the future and focus on the youth. So positive youth development has to be central. Any attempt to redirect a continent or a nation and nurture servant leaders must start with its youth. Lerner in 2009 in his Watershed article described positive youth development as a process that promotes the 5 C's: competence, confidence, connection, character, and caring. He also described thriving young people as individuals who actively nurture, cultivate, and develop positive qualities. Governments and organizations implement the youth development approach by providing services for youth that achieve the following. It ensures that basic needs, physical and psychological health, food and shelter, safety, and other needs are met, both in the short and long term. It provides a foundation of well-being that frees youth to focus on developmental tasks. It treats youth with respect and involves them in decision-making in all aspects of nation building. It provides opportunities for youth to develop leadership skills, be meaningfully engaged in community life, and make real contributions, as well as develop and test new knowledge and practical skills. It empowers youth to make a difference in their communities. It facilitates supportive youth and adult relationships and partnerships that most universities do. It engages family, school, and community as partners with youth. Having said that, in his book, There Was a Country, Chidi Achebe reminds African young people in particular that this power will never be handed over on a silver or gold platter. Young Africans must rise up and take an active role in partisan politics. The youth can only write the full story if they are amongst the players, but if they choose to be on the sidelines, they will be relegated to write the footnotes of history. Democracy can serve as a tool for intellectual change. One of the most crucial parts of this entire process is involvement of talented, honest intellectuals in nation building and politics. There has been a steady and almost pathological apathy among the members of this group for years. They have taken the back seat as followers instead of leaders of our continent, watching as we have slipped steadily into near oblivion in the hands of less capable individuals. It is time that we see greater direct political involvement, organization, and activism from our intellectuals. Having said that, I must acknowledge the serious difficulties on the ground for most honest Africans who don't have the benefits of looted stashes of cash from the national treasury to buy the way to power and influence. One suggestion is to form coalitions among like-minded to raise funds. Another is to push through an African version of campaign finance reform that limits the amount of money any one individual or group can spend from his or her private funds for campaign election purposes. I already foresee difficulties implementing these suggestions, simplistic as some may seem in present-day Africa. At least it will be a beginning in an evolving system that aspires to fairness and equality and Pan-African success. But first, let's find servant leaders and make sure their fellowship is educated. The concept of this leadership, this servant leadership, embodying a sacred trust endowed by well-informed followers, is an ancient proposition. Historians point to the genesis in ancient Egypt and later in Asian Minor, as well as India and other parts of the world. Robert Greenleaf is widely considered the modern father of servant leadership intellectual thought. And he proposes that It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve, not to lead, to serve first. Then a conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead after the desire to serve. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priorities and needs are being taken care of. The best test and difficult to administer is this. Do those served grow as persons? Do they grow while being served? Do they become healthier? Are they more prosperous, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? So where and how are these leaders to be groomed? This is the role of universities like Stellenbosch. Africa, like India, has an elaborate tertiary educational system. Once upon a time, Africans with Indian university degrees faced the embarrassing prospect of being demoted to secondary school status. Well, this is what dogged stick-with-itude bears out. So India has transformed itself to one of the leading intellectual gems on the globe. Today, unlike in booming India, university graduates of citadels of higher learning in Africa obtain what a distinguished African vice chancellor has termed a progressively inferior education and face dismal job prospects. Compounding this dismal situation is the explosion of all sorts of new colleges and universities in this milieu of mediocrity. Now, the universities of Stellenbosch and Wits and Cape Town, Makerere and Suka, Ibadan, etc., could generate billions of dollars in revenue if they were to receive appropriate funding from the public and private sector. At the beginning of the talk, we've already seen how the greatest universities have been able to do that in their own great nations. They could also attract these African universities, the immense intellectual capital that exists among Africans the world over. We must dramatically improve the quality of our educational system from pre-kindergarten, of our educational system, period, from pre-kindergarten to university level, if we're able to stand a chance at making the leap forward from underdevelopment to the club of advanced nations. We can bolster these efforts by developing a culture of institutional intellectual philosophy. Pumla was talking about my award at Bard College. I was sitting there listening to Leon Botstein, the great president of Bard, who just received $500 million from George Soros and is matching it with another $500 million himself to turn Bard into the billion-dollar club of tertiary institutions. This is a college with less than 2,000 students. There's a role for telecommunications and information technology. We are witnessing a steady and rapid revolution in the telecommunications sector in Africa. There are currently 480 million Africans with cell phones on the continent, over 110 million in Nigeria alone. Recent launched satellites, the establishment of 500 base stations, and news of investments pouring into this section to billions over the past several years is encouraging. Africa has also emerged as one of the most important growth markets globally, both in fintech and other forms of IT. There are currently over 400 homegrown fintech companies in Africa, with Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, and Cairo being the fastest growing hubs. The recent laying of multiple submarine cables connecting Africa to Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and North America lays bare old myths of this ancient continent, now replaced with one that is ready to embrace digital technologies and their transformative powers. Better telecommunications will mean increased access to internet, therefore entree into the information age that the rest of the world is enjoying. In the 21st century, this access will mean admittance to avenues of commerce, science, the arts, education, and thus intellectual and material power. There's thus a critical part for IT revolution to play in the envisioned intellectual reinvigoration of Africa. There's a role for the press. An American colleague of mine who has witnessed Africa over a dozen times and visited here asked me this question recently: why do our journalists gravitate towards the most vulgar, corrupt, and disdainful Africans, reporting their every utterance? Surely they must realize that the power they possess to ignore these individuals and help set a national agenda for African development. Rather than criticize the press, I will only encourage the intellectuals amongst them to help raise the quality of the dialogue surrounding national and continental issues through editorials and articles. It will be refreshing to see more pieces that ask probing questions of our office holders and hold them accountable for mismanagement. It'll be also nice to see profiles of honest, talented individuals within the government. And with all of this would reset national values, particularly among the youth. So my Harvard colleague is right. The media holds immense power. I am sure they realize it. One can only hope they become allies in this intellectual journey. One of the most fundamental strategies has to be empowering women. Throughout history, the seminal role of women in society has been clear. The more educated the women, the more advanced the nation. Aisha Abdi of King's College London makes this salient point that all African nations should heed. Gender inequality comes at a significant economic cost as it hinders productivity and economic growth globally. According to the World Bank, countries are losing 160 trillion in wealth because of differences in lifetime earnings between women and men. And for the young people, I repeat this, countries are losing 160 trillion in wealth because of differences in lifetime earnings between women and men. The Borgen Report provides this remedy. Reducing gender inequality is therefore key to economic advancement. Investing in girls' education provides a boost to a developing country's progress and acts as a catalyst for gender equality on multiple levels. Provided with an education, girls are more likely to earn a higher income later in life, increasing their family's overall quality of life. We're going to wrap up by a few strategies, beginning with borrowing a few leaves from others that have succeeded. Revisiting the Singaporean example, the success as explained by one of the chief members of the founder of Singapore's cabinet is summarized in 3 simple sentences. M for meritocracy. The cult of mediocrity must be removed from Africa through the ballot box. The civil society groups should spend their NGO salaries educating the masses and not be on TV, educating the masses and strengthening institutions against rigging and other democratic abuses of power. P for pragmatism. Let's abolish ethnic bigotry in government, enshrine it in our laws. Let us elect the best people from any part of the country, from any ethnic group, gender, creed, sexual orientation. As long as they're the best, let's elect them to make choices for us. H for honesty, anti-corruption. We have good, qualified, honest people in every hamlet, village, town, and city, state in Africa. Let's identify these people and get them involved at every level of our body politic. Let's enforce existing laws against graft and corruption. Once we've put all these things in place, we will see a national evolution towards sustained progress, and it will cause a revolution that I call the intellectual renaissance of Africa. African leaders, intellectuals, can halt our downward spiral by effectively controlling and restricting access to the nation's wealth, whether it's petrodollars in Nigeria, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, minerals, gold, diamond, copper, cobalt, bauxite, that fuel the corruption in the first place. And we can direct these resources to develop the nation's decaying infrastructure, roads, water, electricity. You get the drift. Putting in place a system of checks and balances, which does not exist in most parts of the continent, that makes corruption inconvenient, enforcing jail terms for the guilty, mandating unannounced auditing of private and public organizations, companies, and parastatals by non-government firms with impeccable reputations, making government earnings public, publishing oil corporation, diamond and gold corporation account portfolios, costs, expenditures, salaries, budgets, etc., meaning transparency, can have a profound effect in redirecting Africa's downward course and weakening state. The ripple effects of such a transformation would be felt in a myriad of areas. Most profoundly, it would set the stage at last for a generation of leaders who adopt public service to serve the nation and hence the people and not to get rich. An African intellectual transformation. In conclusion, I hope I have made the case for intellectuals as leaders and nation builders. But not all fruits from the same genus of trees and shrubs taste the same. We must, in addition, insist that those leaders be servant leaders. As stated earlier, this new intellectual leader must be different from those of the past. A servant leader, a sophisticate, who understands the complexity of global politics, able to walk the fine line between an advocacy for African liberation and development and a non-aligned vision of friendship with all nations. Before an African Renaissance can take place, however, it is to people like Nelson Mandela, like Professor Achebe implores in There Was a Country, father of the nation of South Africa, anti-apartheid leader, lawyer, writer, intellectual, humanitarian, that present and future African leaders must go for sustenance and inspiration. I believe we should scrutinize more closely the successes and failures of thriving economies and societies as we lay our own path in the world. I am not advocating that Africans copy Western or Asian cultures or civilizations. Very importantly, I am not calling for an elitist system or a class-based structure. Indeed, I am an activist for a meritocracy. It is only under this arrangement that individuals of simple means, but with the brightest minds, can rise to leadership. Let us not forget that Barack Obama and William Jefferson Clinton were from very simple backgrounds and were able to rise to lead the most powerful country in the world. This could only happen within a structure that actively seeks and celebrates intellectual achievement and merit. So one of my takeaways for the young people would be, one, no great civilization or country, the US, Germany, Great Britain, China, Singapore, Brazil, you name them, exists in a vacuum without an equally great intellectual tradition. Let us fight anti-intellectualism. Let us not make fun of our intellectual glory of the past. I often see young people take aim at achievers of the past as if there is a finite number of achievers. And if I don't demolish a great writer, I too will not be seen. That is false. We must celebrate the past and build upon what has been done. African societies organized around merit, pragmatism, and honesty, anti-corruption, that are led by servant leaders hold the greatest promise for African economic advancement and development of our people. Thank you.
Historical evening you've given us. Is there something going on? You can hear me. I say thank you for that very rich, all-encompassing historical evening you've given us. It's wonderful to connect with that truth about who we are on the continent. I'm sure there are so many questions, and I can see coming up on stage on this board here. But I wonder, what does it take to make these institutions, if we're to look now at the institutions rather than the continent, the broader continent, look at these institutions like Stellenbosch University.
Yes,
what would it take for these institutions to nurture the kind of intellectual engagement, intellectual wealth that you're talking about? What would you, you spoke about so many countries and instances of leadership that demonstrate the possibility of rising beyond what is expected, like Singapore, for example. I like that example of Singapore. But what if we look at the much micro-level structures, such as institutionally, what would it take? What did it take to do that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think that leadership is the answer. I think that if you have the right leaders in place, you're likely to then be able to nurture the right ideas and create the right environment for those ideas to flourish. If you have the wrong leaders, there will be a stifling of innovation and ideas. And the reason the West has taken intellectual establishments and thought seriously is because they understand exactly that. You put in the right leader of Harvard University, for instance, have had a legacy of great leaders, then you have this explosion of innovation and thought that then is impactful on the lives of young people who are being educated. If you have mediocre leaders, then the opposite is the case. So Stellenbosch, for instance, is very blessed to have a great leader as their president. We know him here as physicians, and we know he's an excellent mind. If we could replicate him throughout the continent, we'll be all set. So I think that is really what we need. We've seen an erosion of the quality of leadership in universities. And remember, I come from an academic background. Both my parents were professors. So I know of what I speak. We've gone and witnessed some universities that have been world-class in the rankings. Let me just give you an example. Nigerian universities, where in the 1970s, you would get a bachelor's degree from a Nigerian university, apply to any place in the world, and they would give you an advanced placement for master's or PhD. Now you get a bachelor's from a Nigerian university. Some of them don't even recognize the degree, let alone give you an advanced placement. That's what I mean by deterioration of standards, and that came from mediocrity at leadership that then translated to mediocrity at every single level. And people take these things lightly. It's often because there's too much political interference in the lives of universities. So we need politicians out so that people who are serious-minded can choose their leaders and set the mold for the rest of the continent and our people.
Chidi, there are a few questions, quite a number of questions that are coming on the screen. But I do want to start with the audience present today. And I know before I got up, I got a note from Stephen, one of our postdoc fellows, who happens to be your countryman, who wants to ask you a question. So over to you, Stephen. And then please be prepared, anyone else who wants to. We're going to have to shorten the questions, so please be succinct. We're running out of time, but please go ahead, Stephen. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Achebe.
Thank you, Stephen.
It's a huge honor to listen to you. We grew under the wings of your father, so thank you. I just have a quick question, but I think you touched on it a little. Right now in Nigeria, as we're getting ready for elections, there's this climate of anti-intellectualism that is all over the place. In such a situation, what would you advise? What are intellectuals to do if people don't think you have anything to offer them? Thank you.
Yeah. Somebody asked me the same question, and I will use Israel as an example. I have a lot of Israeli friends and colleagues, and I admire what they've achieved in terms of how they've been able to connect with Israeli intellects across the globe. The problem we are having in Nigeria is that there are too few intellectuals with the means to purchase documentation or to be active members of partisan politics. What they need to do is come together. One of the biggest challenges we have in Nigeria, and you know this, is that we don't like working together. Everybody wants to be singular and to be the only person on TV, right? That is a recipe for disaster. We need to work together. Intellectuals need to get themselves, together and form a political front that will be an alternative for the masses. There are a few intellectuals in that space, right? A few of them, but they are also almost always serving under people who are less capable than them, which is one of the problems we have in that country. So when I was speaking of those less capable, leadership, I had Nigeria in view. And Nigeria is one example of other problems. Ghana has gotten it right. I like Ghana's example because Ghana fought anti-intellectualism, and they were able to recruit solid individuals who were well educated, and they've had 5 consecutive leaders. None of them were fantastic. Not all of them were fantastic, but each of them were intellectuals, right? So Nigeria thinks it's the giant of Africa, but I would suggest they learn from its smaller cousin next door.
Chidi, sometimes the camera goes still, but you can still hear, but it doesn't look as if you can hear. Could someone, something happened, you back now, Chidi. So maybe this is a sign that we are running out of time. Chidi,
so I just wanted to make sure he heard that maybe we should take examples from our smaller cousin called Ghana that seems to have gotten it right. We seem to be a very arrogant people, a giant of Africa, this and that. But we can learn from our cousins across the continent, those who've done things right. We can learn from the mistakes as well as the successes of our fellow Africans. And I think Ghana is an example that's also done well. I like some other countries. Tanzania now has a female president. Malawi has had a woman as president. And Ethiopia has also done the same. Nigeria does not have a single example of a woman in a high position beyond Secretary of State or Secretary of the federal government, right? It's really tragic. And these are things that we can learn as examples of gender empowerment. We just said that if you want a nation to advance, you must have women pulled up. There's no other recipe. Once you educate the women, the entire nation is educated, and then the entire nation is advanced. Men should wake up and get over themselves and make sure women are equally treated and given access to education and opportunities.
I would love to hear from one of the women before I call Samantha. I would love to hear from one of the younger women as a kind of a dialogue with Dr. Achebe's last point. Do any of the younger researchers at the back, I'm looking at you, from the center, so please say something, because I know that there will be rigorous conversation and reflection on Dr. Achebe's talk at the center. So let's start here, please. So I think that, there you go. Excellent, gratia.
Hi, Dr. Achebe. Thank you so much for your lecture.
Yeah, so people can...
My name is Grazia Iribagiza, and I'm one of the students at AVReQ. I was really intrigued by how you framed intellectuals as people who are also outside of institution, and it being important for us to use that definition to think with. And I also heard your call at the end around meritocracy and trying to use that as a useful way of thinking about leadership moving forward. But I'm just curious about people who are a little bit disillusioned about meritocracy and see it as not a useful way of moving in today's world with the structural systems that are pushing back against us. So why do you think it's important to think of intellectuals outside of the framings of institution now more
Of
than
institutions. Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Let's go. Pumla called me the son of the soil. So I don't want anyone to feel that because of my fancy education, I don't know anything about Africa. My dad used to visit the village every single week. Anyone that knows the author of Things Fall Apart knows that he was a traditionalist, but he was a sophisticat. He was both at ease at the House of Lords as he was in the village. So we all know that if you go to the villages, you will find solid, honest people who, if they were empowered, would be fantastic representatives of the people. They are not necessarily the most fancy educated people. So we cannot talk about leadership just in one finite way. We must broaden that definition to talk about leadership that also includes, in a big umbrella, the institutions of the core, but outside that, who are these people who are the best representatives of the people, that the people themselves choose, who are also honest and who are also well qualified based on experience or other indices that the people have put in place. To answer your question about merit, it's interesting that the societies that tell you, well, meritocracy sucks, use meritocracy to become advanced. Then tell you, no, you shouldn't use it. You should use something else. But meanwhile, their own path to greatness was a path of meritocracy, right? So I think that what we should do is to think about bringing everyone along, right? And that may need some sort of, massaging and maybe affirmative action or whatever. But you cannot remove from the center a system that celebrates the best and the brightest. That's the only way to succeed, right? It's like, I'll give you an example. In The Trouble with Nigeria, my dad talks about how Nigeria has this national character thing, right? Where we don't talk about marriage, we just talk about where are you from, right? We're bean counters. One from this part, one from that, right? And then when we have a football match, we have a national character group that always lose because we're not fielding the best. If you want to win a football match, that's a very simple example, you put in the best team. You don't put your 11th 11. You put your first 11, the first best. And so if you're going to have advancements on the continent, find the best people, right? And it doesn't matter if all 11 people are from one section of the country, as long as they achieve for everybody's interest. Later on, as you have made major strides, you can begin to talk about what some of these other advanced nations have put in place. The national character. We're doing it reversely. We're doing the national character first without merit. That's not the way it's done. You build on merits, and then you talk about national character to increase the tent, right? And so these are some of the upside down things we're doing on the continent that must end if we're going to achieve great success.
Thank you, Chidi. We have to end it there, unfortunately, and call upon Samantha. You really bring our attention to the complexity of what is involved. There isn't one way of doing this right.
No.
There are several layers that we have to address, to have to peel in order to get to the point of, the future, the kind of future that we want to build. And I think you got kudos from the room here for emphasizing the importance of the role of women. There's so many of them in this room today, actually outnumbering men, so thank you for raising that. So thank you again. Shall we give Chidi another round of applause? Please don't go away. When everyone is left, we want to say goodbye properly to you, but Samantha, for now, is coming up. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here this evening, in person and online. And I would like to say a special thank you to Dr. Chidi Achebe for your lecture. It was really a privilege to sit here and listen to you this evening. I'm going to keep it brief. I know that we're running out of time a bit, but I have others to thank that played a role in this wonderful event this evening. Firstly, I'd like to thank Dr. Nico Ellemer from the Center for Collaboration in Africa for your collaboration and partnership in this event. Thank you very much. Prof. de Villiers, thank you for being here. Thank you for always supporting us in the work that we do, and thank you for hosting this event. To other funders of this event, we'd like to thank Prof. Hester Klopper, who is the SU Deputy Vice Chancellor, Strategy, Global and Corporate Affairs, Prof. Nico Koopman, SU Deputy Vice Chancellor, Social Impact, Transformation and Personnel, Professor Phumla Gobodo-Madikizela, the Director of AVReQ, for her vision that shaped this event, Bongani Majijima, Director of the SU Museum, thank you for hosting us so wonderfully in this space tonight, and to the rest of your colleagues, Bongani, thank you. I know they were involved in all the logistics and so on, so thank you to everyone involved there. To Ms. Tanya Verheid, Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, thank you for your presence. We appreciate it. To members of the AVReQ Governing Board and Advisory Board, who many of you are attending online, we know and we appreciate that support from you. And then to Randall Adams, Karen Bruns, Senior Director of the SU Development and Alumni Relations, thank you for your support. Also to Unison Mugamu and Wesley Caesar, for all the technical support that you've provided along the way. Also thanks to Jolene Peterson for her administrative support. And then thank you to Marty Media, who, well, I think it's a story for another day, but we met a young journalist at Marty Media for the first time today when he walked into our offices, and he's actually going to be covering the event tonight. So thank you, and it was good to meet you. To end off, I'd just like to say a few words about what life has been like at our center in the wake of these events that we've experienced at the university. And I'd like to say that you know, we at AVReQ have witnessed what these deep ripples in the wake of these events have done for students' lives, for staff lives, how these ripples have affected those on our campus. And we see this through the emotional texture of our in-house discussions. We see this through one-on-one meetings with students, supervision meetings, and so forth, in seminars. All these spaces are spaces through which pain seeps in and really makes the rift in the difference in perceptions, the rift in the different realities so very powerfully illuminated. We also see the effects hearing about students' private experiences at home, the experiences that are not shared too often, and their feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, and how these feelings exert an extreme toll on students' personal lives and their academic work, a toll on their dreams. This is a volatile time for many, and the ripple effects, I think, leave no one unaffected. I must say at our centre, I'm blessed to work with colleagues and students who take these questions seriously, even if this means diving into unknown territory and facing discomfort in ways that push our established boundaries or that push our ways of knowing. So our centre has engaged with these important questions for a few years now through public dialogues and scholarship that speak to the textures of racial dynamics and the textures of gendered power, and the problem of transformation at Stellenbosch University and beyond. Students at our centre are supported to pursue such research. To name a few of the research projects currently ongoing and completed recently: racial microaggression on the SU campus, queer black men's experiences of navigating life in Stellenbosch University residences, Hair Story, exploring coloured students' experiences and expression of identity at historically white institutions, dehumanization amongst historically disadvantaged groups in South Africa, and research projects on sexual harassment experienced on this campus. This is important work. And as part of our centre's commitment to continue to deepen engagement in these conversations, we've developed a 3-part seminar series on the violence of racism and the dynamics of racial repair. These seminars combine voices of historical scholars on race and the voices of current students at the university, including students in leadership positions at residences. And the purpose of these seminars is to ask important questions about the afterlife of violence. How is this experienced in the here and now, and how might we think of repair within the context of Stellenbosch University? Titles of these seminars include Theological Roots of Whiteness and the Search for Repair in South Africa with Cobus van Veengard, Associate Professor in Systematic Theology at the University of South Africa, and a roundtable discussion, Anti-Racism, Student Activism, and the Reparative Quest, which will be moderated by Dr. Wilhelm Verwoerd from AVReQ and Professor Nadine Bowers-du Toit from Practical Theology at Stellenbosch University. And the information and links for these seminars will be posted on our website. In fact, 2 of them already are, so please go have a look. The centre, the AVReQ Centre under events, and you will see the registration information for these events, or please join us in person at our centre in our seminar room. We invite you to join, and these are difficult conversations which challenge us, and we invite you to come challenge us and also to challenge yourselves and be part of this community that is really willing to sit with pain and discomfort and uncertainty in the knowing that such work must be done. So thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's some food and refreshments at the back. Some food and refreshments at the back, ma'am.